Today we're going to go through the new company wizard, calendars and entity dates. We have briefly touched on these in previous sessions, but we'll delve a little deeper into these three items today. The new company wizard was added to FinPower Connect to streamline setting up a new company database from scratch. By introducing this wizard, the hope was that many of the common setup errors could be eliminated by creating the basics required to then be leveraged off for further customization and configuration. When adding a new company, by opening FinPower Connect and going to File, New Database, you will then see the following wizard, and we will follow the steps through to create the new database. For the purposes of this presentation, we will use Microsoft Access as an example. Once the database itself has been created by FinPower Connect with all the relevant tables and structure in the background ready to go, the database will open. You will notice that the evaluation license is automatically applied initially and presents a warning advising of the limitations. Once we click OK, you'll see that the license information wizard opens, prompting you, the user, to replace it with the correct client license, which, as we've seen in a previous session, we can simply do by importing it from a file. Once the license has been added, you'll see that the new company wizard then opens automatically. The first page of the wizard pretty much sums up what we've just covered with regards to creating standard items, etc. The second page is where we can define the name of our new company and the country the company is based in. The country code is important as this defines many of the options throughout FinPower Connect, including country, state and area codes for phone numbers, currency and third-party integrations, although there is a setting to show all services for all countries, which for some clients may be appropriate. Currently, FinPower Connect offers database structures for Australia, Fiji, Great Britain, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand and the United States of America. As you can see here, when I change the country code, different options appear. Australia gives you the option to define a state as an example, as does the United States. However, you'll notice that the United States does not have a GST option. The next page of the wizard allows entry of the company's contact details, though these are not mandatory at this time and can be completed at a later time if desired. The modules page, which is relatively self-explanatory, asks which of the modules you would like to initialize. Depending on your license, you may see different options here, and depending on what your client's requirements are, you may not need to have them all ticked. Though there is nothing really wrong with doing the whole lot, especially if you're not yet sure what you will and won't need. The option under Other Options, Create Unknown Client for saving account quotations, should always be ticked. Otherwise, errors in certain situations may occur. On the next page, you'll see a full summary of what will be created is displayed. As you can see from this list here, there is quite a lot. This saves a lot of time by creating samples and defaults to get you started. For example, we can see here under deposits that we've got two different account types that will be created, plus disbursement accounts, because in this case we're licensed for everything and have left most things ticked. The wizard also goes through and creates things like documents, account roles, elements, transaction types, the main bank account, and basic payment methods, security register items, monitor categories, and much more. You'll see down here under tax categories, the one for New Zealand has been created. This is a good example of why the country code selected is important also. One other thing I'd like to point out here is that the holidays added under calendar as part of the new company wizard, 3 years of holidays are automatically added. But after that period, or if any changes have been made, the user will need to maintain the calendar, which we will cover off in more depth when we get to that section. Once we click Finish, everything will be created. If you do cancel out of the wizard, either accidentally or on purpose, it isn't a big deal. As the message will tell you, if you click Cancel, you'll receive an alert that states, "You have cancelled the new company wizard," which may mean one or more modules have not been properly initialized. The new company wizard can be rerun at any time from the Tools menu, Global Settings option, General page. You won't be able to do much of anything in the database, however, until you go back and complete this process, as you'll likely run into configuration-related errors, so the sooner the better. On that note, this leads well into the next section. The other purpose of the new company wizard is for the automation of adding an additional module known as initializing. I deliberately unticked loans from our first run through so that you could see what the wizard did and didn't do the first time round. If we go to the admin menu and the account types, we can see here that the deposit account types were created automatically. If we review the accounting page on the account type, you'll see that the elements have been created and defined to give the user an idea of what is required and where to go to customize further to meet the needs of the client. You will notice that no GL accounts have been defined, so you'll need to manage that process as part of the setup. Each client's business requirements for general ledger setups are of course different and tailored directly to their needs, so they will need to tell you what GL accounts are required and where. There will be a separate session for GL accounts and accounting ledgers down the track. As mentioned, the new company wizard can be run at any time from Global Settings under the General section on the database page. So we'll do that now to initialize our loans. Clicking the wizard button will launch it for us, and we simply go through the same process we did before. This time you'll notice that the modules already created are unticked and we're left with the suggested options to initialize. Click Next, quickly check over what is listed and then click Finish. Now, if we go back to our example of account types, you will see that we've got all of the loan types added there. These make great starting points for customizing account type options to suit your client's needs. In addition to the elements on the accounting page, sample documents are also created. These are created and defined on the account type for the critical events. For example, statements. You'll see they are highlighted in blue because it must have a document attached. So that largely sums up the new company wizard. It's really easy to run and is a feature of FinPower Connect that is often forgotten about. The summary page that shows what will be created is particularly useful. Calendars. Our next section is on calendars, and as mentioned earlier, the new company wizard will go ahead and generate the public holidays calendar for the next 3 years. By default, it adds the known holidays for the country your database is set to. In my example here, if we go to the admin menu calendars and load up my newly created G calendar, you'll see a full list of New Zealand public holidays until 2024. New Zealand is a good case for talking about this area as it is often forgotten. It was highlighted recently when a new public holiday was added for Matariki, which we've now built into FinPower Connect. New databases have it, as you can see, provided they've completed the new company wizard, but existing clients will not be updated automatically. The ongoing maintenance can be run at any stage, but it's recommended to be updated at least once per year. To update your calendar, you simply go into edit mode and select Add Holidays. This will launch a wizard which allows you to add not only your country's holidays but others also. However, if you're adding holidays for other countries, you need to be careful about what they're classified as, because if they're listed as a non-business day or holiday, bank transactions won't process depending on your other settings, etc. Once you've chosen your country, you can progress to the next page and enter the date range. It might be tempting to push the end date out really far, but new holidays can happen as exhibited with Matariki. It's really quick and easy to do it, and now as you can see I've got the New Zealand public holidays now until 2027 in this database. One other thing to note is that regional or state specific holidays are not added because they are still technically banking days for the rest of the country. The next thing to consider is business days. By default, all holidays are flagged as non-business days, but you can add more or make changes to existing days. The important distinction here is what is considered a business day from FinPower Connect's perspective. This means a business day is a banking day. In other words, a day the banks are open and operating. There may be days your client is actively open and doing applications and things, but if it is a Saturday or Sunday, as an example, the banks are not currently open. This means caution is advised in determining what is or isn't a business day. For further clarification, non-business days in FinPower Connect mean direct debit and direct debit files cannot be created, loan payments and settlements default to the next business day, account type options relating to business days and grace periods are at play, for example the following setting on a deposit account type. Roll interest payout date forward if falls on a non-banking day. These restrictions also apply after the cut-off time has passed on a business day. To set or change cut-off times for your business days, you double-click on the weekday header in the calendar while in edit mode. For example, if we double-click on M for Monday, to adjust these details, you'll get the following form open. This allows the option of defining a cut-off time, for example 4:30 p.m. You can then see down in the summary whether one is set or not. The calendar is set by default on the entity by the new company wizard, and you can have more than one calendar set. You'll see here on the calendar page that you can have one set for the business or banking days and one for working days. Moving on now to entity dates. We did very briefly touch on this in week 3's session, however we will cover it again today. So what are entity dates and where are they used? Entity dates are found on the account page on the entities form. As you can see here. There are two groupings of date ranges, the first controlling the date range in which accounts can be opened. The second relates specifically to transactions and whether they can be added or processed, meaning if you attempt to add a transaction outside that date range, it will fail. These settings are available for several reasons, but the key ones are as follows. To assist in preventing data entry errors for things like reporting, and to avoid issues with transactions being backdated after end-of-month reporting has been completed. These are different to accounting periods and are simply a way of controlling backdating abilities, etc. As discussed in a previous session, you will receive errors while running the account processes if the date on the transactions is outside your range on your entity, and is something that is really good to be aware of and quite common. We've come to the end of our session now. I hope you've learned something new. In our next session, we will be looking at permissions, roles, user groups, and user policies.